Welcome to the Western Standards, The Pipeline. My name is Paul Holmes, and I'm the digital editor of the Western Standard, coming to you from Victoria, British Columbia. Joining me today is Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, coming to you from Calgary, Alberta. How are things in lovely Calgary, Alberta today, Derek?
It's snowing and nearly negative 50.
Well, fantastic.
This is the Western Standards weather report.
Make sure you stay warm. Outstanding. So this is, of course, our weekly show. We're going to cover a few topics today, Iran being the big topic of the week. And we're going to touch a little bit on the Golden Globes because, hey, why not? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the committee of the United Nations that condemned said pipeline as well. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Derek, we all woke up one morning or went to bed one evening hearing about Iran, and suddenly it was World War III trending on Twitter. What's going on?
Well, I was a bit alarmed yesterday when Google Ads algorithms had matched up the Iran stories we were covering yesterday on the Western Standard with advertisements for a World War III simulation game.
Oh.
So I thought that Google might know something that we don't. So I was a bit concerned. But yeah, it's obviously been a mess in the Middle East with the Iran situation now. Until this morning, I actually didn't see much of a way to disentangle this from continuing to escalate. Trump says Iran is blinked, but it actually looks to me like Trump is blinked, which is very surprising to me. His whole personality, for better or worse, is not the type to back away from the ledge here. I mean, the drone strike on the Iranian general Soleimani, his first name I cannot pronounce, that was, in the American view, retaliation for the attack on the U.S. embassy from Iranian-sponsored militias in Baghdad. The Iranians did not see the scores even after Soleimani was taken out. Like, he was a big deal. He was their top general.
Right.
And they sought to even the score with a missile attack, a ballistic missile attack on a few U.S. air bases in Iraq, where Canadians are stationed as well. And this has kind of gone unnoticed that this is, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first conventional military attack on a U.S. base since Pearl Harbor. This hasn't happened in peacetime.
Right.
So I wouldn't be counting, an attack on a base in Afghanistan, the American setup, or in Vietnam during war times there. But during peacetime, if we could call this peacetime,
Sure.
this is the first conventional military attack on a U.S. base since Pearl Harbor. No one was killed, and Trump has emphasized that. But it's very much not in keeping with his whole modus operandi. He's a tough guy. He is not, though, a neoconservative imperialist in the tradition of most American presidents, regardless of party. He's been trying to extract America from overseas commitments, particularly in the Middle East, which I think has been a positive move, and one thing that's put him at odds with the warfare party, the warfare state, that dominates both parties in Washington. And really left him as an outsider, and alienated him from much of the traditional hawkish neoconservative base of the Republican Party. But it did look yesterday, in my view, that just Trump's personality does not allow America to take an attack on its bases, even if no one's killed. That would not allow an attack on its bases to go unanswered. And I don't think any American president, especially Trump, would allow that. But today he held a press conference after his signature kind of crazy tweets about we're the best. Then he comes out and says Iran's blinked, and I actually haven't seen how Iran's blinked. Iran took United States punched them in the nose, and they punched America, kicked America in the shin. And then America says they've blinked. But it looks to me like the United States is blinked, actually, which perhaps is going to keep us from a major war.
There's a couple of very peculiar things here. First of all, Soleimani, or however you pronounce it, nobody knew who this guy was a week ago. Like, certainly unless you were, a a political scientist that studied Middle East politics. Short of those people, I had no idea who this guy
No one could
was.
even name Canada's top general.
No, well, I can't. I have no idea who that is.
There you go.
But and I was in the army. But and this is so. If you're going to take out a big name like that, don't you demonize them a little bit ahead of time, or was that it's just strategically best to kind of get in there and do it, and then do the demonizing afterwards?
Well, it's been pointed out, I think rightfully, that there is no Trump doctrine. We always say, like, there's a Reagan doctrine, there's a Bush doctrine, a Clinton doctrine, Obama doctrine. There's not really a coherent Trump doctrine. He is an opportunist. And I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. I mean that he has very little ideological view of foreign affairs other than that he doesn't like China. That's about it. He doesn't like China. That's
he loves China, but he doesn't like China.
Well, he likes China. He hates China. So
love-hate sort of situation.
Yeah. So that's the one consistent, is kind of an anti-Chinese containment foreign policy. Everything else is what you might almost call a Bismarckian realist policy of being opportunistic in the sense of just reacting to events as they come, not trying to play some long, grand strategy game with pieces on the board. Something happens and he reacts to it. So
it's very telling. It's very telling that in American politics, the fact that Donald Trump doesn't despise Vladimir Putin is problematic for the Democrats. He must be cozying up to them. We hear that all the time because he doesn't hate them and he doesn't hate the Russians enough, right?
Well, I thought it was always supposed to be the Democrats were always accused of sucking up to the Russians when they were communists. Now that they're kind of a neo-imperialist, a reactionary regime, now the Russians are bad guys, but they were okay when they were communists.
Yeah.
But so Soleimani was in Iraq, though, because he's an Iranian general, he's not normally in Iraq. So I think they just saw the opportunity, because a drone strike on a major general of an enemy state is a provocative thing. I think it was justified to take the guy out. I think it was a reasonable retaliation for the attack on the embassy. Was it a wise move to attack a man that senior that would obviously be very provocative? That's a completely different question that I don't really know the answer to. But it was much more acceptable to hit the guy with a drone in Iraq than in Iran, where the United States does not have authority to have any military action. So that's probably why they didn't go through a protracted propaganda campaign to hate the guy, because, as you said, no one had heard of him until he ended up as a pile of mist.
My favorite conspiracy theory that I've heard from a few sort of pundits online, a few tweets here and there, is this idea that there was a mutual need, that Soleimani was freelancing too much. The Ayatollah was unhappy about that, but couldn't really take him out or demote him internally without there being a whole lot of blowback. And of course, Trump wants to get out of the region, wants to close some bases, wants to withdraw. And so this worked out beautifully. Just a one quick perfect phone call, and they could make the exchange. And maybe that's why we're not seeing further escalation. You think there's anything to that?
I don't normally attribute a complicated explanation to it when a simple one will do.
Fair enough. I do love it, though, from an entertainment value perspective.
Yeah, now again, using a term used by conspiracy theorists, deep state, I think it's a real thing, in that there's a bureaucratic inertia within every government that stays there regardless of which party is in power at the time. At least this exists in democracies, where we turn over governing parties from time to time. And do actors within the so-called deep state act independently and do things? Absolutely. Politics is dishonest and full of misinformation enough. But when you're talking foreign policy, when you're talking intelligence and counterintelligence and defense, misinformation, lies, and propaganda is just currency It's absolutely necessary, which is why you can't trust anything from any government, we're told.
Right.
So you're almost forced you have to make a judgment though on these things. So you almost have to take it at face value to a reasonable extent. But you have to keep in mind that they're probably lying to you somewhere. Just how much are they lying to you? Based on the facts we have, I'd say the United States was probably justified in what it did. A different question was it a wise move? I don't know. I thought when Iran launched those missiles at the United States that was the dumbest thing they could possibly do. Their conventional forces, while semi-strong, are no match for the United States, let alone the United States, plus the Sunni Arab powers, Israel, possibly Turkey, and a few other of the Western allies. They would stand no chance whatsoever. Their strength is in asymmetrical warfare, terrorism, militias, electronic warfare, that kind of thing. That's where they're strong. And so their policy is simmer, not boil. They don't want a conventional war with the United States because it's suicide.
Well, and really the best way to end it, certainly if the protests happening on the streets in Iran are legitimate, and we have no reason to suspect otherwise, there was an appeasement to the people that needed to happen. And so sending some missiles to a base that also, by the way, didn't kill anybody, just gosh darn, we missed. It sounds to me like a really great way to end it. You struck back, you hit them hard. Well, nobody died.
I thought they would have been smarter going with traditional terrorism, like blow up a hotel of innocent people or somewhere. Like they do it all the time and they get away with it because there's plausible deniability. You're like, oh, geez, Hezbollah, bombed a bus full of kids. Oh, what are we gonna do?
Well, the problem
that's what they do because they can deny it constantly. They couldn't deny these missiles. They took credit for it, which gave the United States a cause belli for war if they so choose. Trump has decided not to do so,
right? Because
even though he might be just, again, if we could take the facts at face value, which you never can, but if you do, he, I think, had justification for war, and he chose not to take it, which I can't remember the last time an American president had cause for war and didn't jump at it.
Yeah. Well, and of course, the terrorist angle wouldn't have worked super well because they just took out their top terrorist, or the terrorist organizer, I should say, not the terrorist organizer, the guy who helped organize the terrorists. So we're told. Anyway, so speaking of alternative angles, of course, coincidentally, an Iranian jet crashed on its
Ukrainian jet
crashed on its way from Tehran to the Ukraine 2 minutes after takeoff, killing, I think, everybody on board, including 63 Canadians, about half people. About half of whom were from Edmonton, of course, Alberta, Canada. So what's going on? What do we know so far?
Well, this is, I just said we almost have to take everything at face value, but we should be highly suspicious. So while everything's going on here, there's rumor, obviously that turned out not to be true, but there's rumor that American warplanes are already in the air headed for Tehran to, strike back for the missile strikes. And late last night, I got notification from Dave Naylor, a news editor, that this had happened. And I have a hard time believing this was just a technical error. Plane crashes over land with everybody lost 2 minutes after takeoff just don't happen anymore. I mean, this kind of thing is so rare. And that it happens to be filled, we can only speculate with who it's been filled with, but it's filled with Ukrainians and Iranians, many of which live in Canada. Now, at least in my own anecdotal experience, the vast majority of Iranians living in Canada don't even call themselves Iranians. They call themselves Persians. And they are vehemently against the Ayatollah theocratic regime. Like these tend to be Western liberals in the classical political sense, not in the party sense that we think of. These tend to be people who are not big fans of the regime. Some of them are allowed to travel back because they're not blowing the government up or something. But and then full of Ukrainians, a power generally considered to be pro-Western. I'm a bit suspicious about what's happened here. I should say a lot suspicious. It just doesn't smell right.
No, it certainly doesn't pass the smell test, but planes do crash. So I guess we'll find out potentially, whether there's more to it, and
I don't think we're going to find anything,
or we won't. Kind of like
planes like this just don't crash.
Yeah. Unless they're was it the Max 8, which was the the Boeing one that they took out of service. They lost a couple of those. Took them out of service.
This was a 737. These things do not just fall out of the sky.
It seems very suspicious. All right. Well, I guess we'll.
You know what else is suspicious?
Tell me what else is suspicious, Derek.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein's
death, which is a good segue to the Golden Globes. When you set it up. Why don't you set it up?
Well, you just did it. We may as well be live. Jeffrey Epstein. Ladies and gentlemen, did Jeffrey Epstein no. Ricky Gervais was the only reason.
Well, he kind of rubbed it in their faces at the Golden Globes. So I've been trying to segue for you, and you're not picking up on my signals here.
You've
set us up with what happened.
You've completed the segue. Well, of course, Ricky Gervais.
I've segued. Now you set it up.
Ricky Gervais was the host of the Golden Globes for the 5th and final time.
This has got to be final.
Well, and I kind of you gotta think the guy's like, not going to apologize for something, and he's there anyway. There had to be like a pretty tight contract, and you can bet if that contract is in fact up, it's probably not getting renewed.
So, like, I guess everybody's seen the video. I'm guessing there's very few people who have not seen the video.
Yeah.
But good God, that was satisfying. I so rarely watch something 15 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I must have watched this video 15 times. It's not just that it's funny. It's just that it's so satisfying to see these smug, superior people just brought down to our level a bit,
Yeah, well, and yeah, I don't remember when I was growing up that actors and singers were seen as competent lecturers of the political discourse of the day. I think this is a fairly new phenomenon, and I can respect if we have some famous actor or musician who's got their PhD in political science, or got their feet wet in journalism or politics or whatever.
If you invented a light bulb before you got into acting, then tell us about electricity.
Yeah.
Otherwise, shut the whatnot up.
Well, and they're certainly welcome to their opinion. And this is the problem, right? You're welcome to your opinion. Everybody is, but they also have a platform, right? They have a platform, people listen. But I think most people take everything that famous people say with a bit of a grain of salt. Just one person's opinion, and I don't know.
Well, look, I don't think anyone's saying they don't have a right to. It just grates on you when, like, every second, to paraphrase Ricky Gervais, he said, like, most of you have no experience in the real world whatsoever. You don't know how. You're not qualified to speak about anything. Most of you have spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg, which. In addition to being true, was like very like a double attack, because you're not allowed to go after her, sing Greta, and you're not allowed to talk about how these guys know nothing. It just is like, don't use it to give a political speech. Thank your agent, thank your God, and F off. And I guarantee you, at least half the people who were nominated for an award were sitting at their tables, and they pulled out their little speeches and a pen and are like panicking to, I can't give a shout out to.
There was one in particular that I can't remember who it was or what the award was, because of course I only watched the clips from Ricky Gervais, like most people. But one actress won an award, and got up and proceeded to give a political,
Jennifer Aniston apparently did, but by Gervais doing this in advance, he kind of salted the fields of everything to come. So I think it was Jennifer. Again, I've only watched. I've probably watched the length of the Golden Globes twice over just by repetitively watching Ricky Gervais. Monologue.
Yeah.
But Jennifer Aniston was apparently the one who did her little speech. But I bet you half the people had these, because these things are always full of political lecturing speeches. And it was I always have a hard time saying his name. Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah. He had an interesting thing. He went out. I don't know if he had changed his speech or was intending to say, but I actually listened to a clip of what he had to say. And he went up there and said, like, look, guys, let's stop being a bunch of hypocrites. We're lecturing everybody, but we're flying around. We got our jets. It's essentially the whole thing's, you could just zoom the camera in on Leonardo DiCaprio at this point, or half the guys, I guess, but he's probably the poster boy for it. But saying, guys, we've got no right to speak about this. We're being hypocrites.
I did like the dig to Apple as the CEO was sitting across the room, and they panned over to Apple, and just as Ricky Gervais was talking about the great virtue of the new show, which was amazing, coming from a company with sweatshops in China.
They're talking about justice and all these things coming from just the whole thing was. Oh.
Well, and what's funny, of course, is Ricky Gervais's show is on. I believe it's on Amazon Prime
for now.
Yeah, for now. Well, they just renewed for season 2 apparently.
But the thing is,
but he
the Golden Globes must hate him because this is the 5th time he's done it, and he's always been pretty tough.
Mm-hmm.
And every time he's saying I'll never get invited back, because he's not just giving little good-natured ribbings. He's always kind of giving it in a serious way. And I think today, not today, just a couple of days ago, he just packed the place with dynamite, and during his speech, he's just pouring gasoline around the crowd. He went out of his way to never get invited back.
Yeah.
But that's what made it so great. So bizarrely, without him, the ratings would be nowhere near what they were. So it's almost like there's a bizarre incentive now to permanently make him the host.
Yeah.
Such as he's there to crap on the whole event. He's what brings the ratings now.
Well, and what's interesting about the state of the culture war, I think this is really interesting. And I hope that 2020 sort of we turn the page a little on this, because Ricky Gervais is no conservative.
No,
he's a liberal. His wife is very notable pro-choice advocate. With very strong political views. And here we are in the middle of this disgusting culture war where everything has just become personal. And here's a guy who's, I think pretty safely to say he's on the left. And he's lecturing people on the left to just basically stop being a bunch of virtue signaling hypocrites and, be nice to people. And actually, I think it was Brad Pitt who, after winning the award or presenting the award or whatever it was, said something along the lines of, hey, why don't we all just go out and do something nice for somebody tomorrow? And I thought, there's a great message.
I think you actually watched the award show.
I've
cited 2 clips, and they were just clips. I think you watched it. Admit it. You didn't just watch the Gervais.
I don't
clip.
even have cable.
You watched the whole show. Admit it.
I wish it was true. But so the greatest moment, and you can do yours. The greatest moment for me was not from the monologue, but it was when he introduced Sandra Bullock to present an award.
So you watched the whole thing. I know you did, because that's not in the clip. You watched the show. You have incriminated yourself. You watched it.
Fine. I watched the whole thing. All right. So excited about Hollywood. All right. So this was the moment. So, and I do love Sandra Bullock. I think she's a fabulous actress. And I do love the Birdcage, which was sorry, it's not the Birdcage.
Whatever, yeah, we all know it's the Bird movie, yeah.
Bird movie. The Bird
it's
movie
a meme everywhere,
Netflix,
so.
Yeah. But of course, the concept with the Bird movie was that you could not look, you couldn't look at the thing that was haunting the world because it would corrupt you and you'd think terrible things would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's an excellent show. So Ricky Gervais is introducing Sandra Bullock, and he says, yeah. So basically, the next person is the star of this Netflix show that we may have seen, where essentially you couldn't look at what was right in front of your face, kind of like Harvey Weinstein. And and then of course there was groans coming from the audience, like of this Hollywood audience, and then basically at that moment he's, hey, you did it, to the crowd. So I think it's probably fairly safe to say that he's not going to get invited back next year, which gives me no reason to watch it next year, to be honest.
You know what? I didn't think he'd get invited back this year. So let's just pray that, as much as he was there to kind of take a turd sandwich on them all, the ratings were good enough that they'll be forced to bring him back. And see if I don't even know if it's possible to top what he did, short of physically burn the place down.
So despite your insistence otherwise, I did not watch it. But if Ricky Gervais comes back next year, I vow that I will watch the whole show.
I believe you about as much as I believe Iranian intelligence.
There we go.
Okay.
Speaking of intelligence, we have the United Nations, the most intelligent organization on the planet, and a certain committee that condemned the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
What's the name and acronym of this committee?
Well, it's the United Nations Committee for the Eradication of Racial Discrimination, which abbreviates to UNERD. And when I first saw it, I thought it was funny, but I thought it was funny for a different reason. So how did you read the name of the committee, Dan?
I thought it was unearned.
Unearned. So
it's unearned. It's just it's some nice countries on there, but then it's a bunch of jerk countries, and they're all there to lecture us about racism and things. And
there you go.
I thought its criticism was unearned.
Well,
but you had a different take on
and I giggled because the first thing I saw was the what was right in front of me, which was "you nerd." It's just a bunch of nerds.
This was like an inkblot Rorschach test or something. Like you look at this name of a committee and you see different.
Yeah, and so this particular committee hasn't been newsworthy very much. But its news has not been earned. It's been unearned. It's been unearned media.
And then they came for you nerds.
Anyway, so they've condemned.
How long can we do this?
Days. We could go through days. This is, by the way, for those of you who watched previous episodes, this is officially the silliest version of the pipeline, despite probably the most serious news of the
we're discussing war and Golden Globes is
we're gonna have to bring it up a level here. All right,
let's class it up. Let's class it up.
All right, sit up straight. Does anybody care about this committee condemning the Trans Mountain Pipeline? It's going to change anything?
Well, I guess we have to explain what happened. That the UNERDs or the unearned guys issued a report. Apparently, pipelines are racist. They demanded that Canada cease construction and approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Site C Dam, and the GasLink Coastal Pipeline, if I got that correct. Three big important projects. This is all based on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which sounds nice as a title, but if you read it, it's a crazy document written by countries with no indigenous populations, at least as we understand the term indigenous. I mean, an old-time Englander, I suppose, is an indigenous Englishman, but we're not referring to the term in that sense. We're talking about former colonial societies. So all these old countries that haven't gone through any of the experiences we have, they write this thing, and it essentially is about giving indigenous peoples not just the right of consultation, which is, I think most of us would agree, very reasonable and important, and not just compensation for property, etc., but talking about giving them an outright veto. And it doesn't even define who has a veto. Is it if all the First Nations agree, except for one particular band disagrees, then they have a veto? Is it if just one individual in a band disagrees? And then we've got the issue of who's actually speaking for the bands, because in many cases, the elected chiefs are actually supporting pipelines and resource developments, but the hereditary chiefs, which have about as much legitimacy as Prince Charles, they often are against it. And I'm not sure why we would take the political advice of Prince Charles or of a hereditary chief. So this is the UN saying that there are a few hereditary chiefs who disagree with this. So Canada should just stop the development of its economy, essentially. And as far as I know, the federal government hasn't responded to this, even though they ostensibly do have a presence at the UN.
Well, and interestingly, we talked about on a previous episode, British Columbia has recognized through a resolution to recognize the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Well, didn't BC say it was going to enshrine it in legislation?
I believe that they did, but I believe that all
the back down now.
I think all that's actually passed was the resolution to do that, but I could be completely wrong.
You know more than I do, but do you think there's any chance they're actually going to give it legal weight, that this nebulous document can trump all legislation like it was some kind of constitution in BC after? Because I know Trans Mountain's opposed by the provincial government, at least technically now. But I thought the Coastal GasLink pipeline, isn't that supported by the provincial government?
Oh, they love gas in the province of British Columbia.
Yeah, as long as it's not Alberta's, they're great with it.
Absolutely, move that. It's the northeast corner of the province where all the gas is coming from. So they're and it's successive governments, the BC Liberals when they were in charge, and of course the BC NDP.
So what do you think the chances are they'll actually put this in legislation?
I think it's a ways off anyway, right? I think it's all it's feel good, and part of there's a downside to the vagaries of it, but there's also an upside in that it leaves enough things open to interpretation. You can interpret things.
Then you leave it to courts to interpret, and our courts tend to be pretty damn bad at interpreting law.
That's a valid point. Yeah,
I when I was in politics, I voted against more legislation than any other MLA in the legislature in the 4 years by a ridiculous margin. Not by a Ron Paul margin, to my shame, but by an approaching Ron Paul margin. I voted against everything pretty much. And if it added to the size of government in aggregate, I voted against it. If it was a vague law and not strictly defined in what it's trying to do very specifically, I voted against it. Yeah. But that tends not to be much of a habit for most politicians. They like vague laws.
No,
here disagree with.
Here in British Columbia, the rule is, you vote pretty much almost 100% of the time with whichever direction your party is voting. That's a long, proud tradition.
That was not very good for my political career.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's true actually in Canada more generally. Interestingly, we borrowed the system from the UK, and it's very common for MPs to vote against their party in the UK. It's just extremely uncommon.
Yeah, it's not inherent to a Westminster Parliament. It's just inherent to Canada and our provinces.
It's very strange.
We should get Scott Reid, the MP from Ontario. He was one of the only reformers elected in Ontario in 2000. He just wrote an essay published about how he was whipped to vote against marijuana legalization, even though he's a libertarian. And he came out saying, I was forced to lie. I'm sorry. I lied about it because I had to maintain party unity, but I was punished and kicked out of my position because he was pro-legalization, and a few things like that. We should really get him on. We should get him on the drill. He would be a really good guy to have on.
That would be good, yeah. A friend of mine, journalist friend, left-wing journalist friend, Sean Holman, did a documentary called Whipped a few years ago that was all about this and the weird history of British Columbia. The conclusion was kind of like, I don't know why it's so weird, but there's lots of potential reasons, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a very true fact of Canada, but nobody can point to exactly why it is. Just some potential reasons, and why it would be any more so than say the UK or another country that has a similar parliament.
Well, maybe we could consider doing a whole episode with Scott Reid there and kind of get into that maybe a bit more. I think there's a lot of discussion for us to have on the topic.
So much. And if you're listening right now to us on YouTube, remember you can get our show on the podcast channel, your favorite podcast app. Subscribe and rate us there. And if you're listening to us on the podcast channel, then find us on YouTube and subscribe and like and comment. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well about topics like this. What topics would you like to see us cover during our shows, the pipeline and the drill? So thank you very much, Derek.
Oh, and don't forget to become a member of the Western Standard.
Of course.
At westernstandardonline.com.
/member.
Just go there.
You'll find it. Yeah.
You'll find
westernstandardonline.com. And of course, the Western Standard does not take government money. So we rely on the goodwill of good folks like yourself.
If you guys don't give us money, we're going to have to get bought by Trudeau, and you really don't want that to happen.
Completely change the editorial slant.
A bit.
Well, thank you so much, Derek, and have a terrific week, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you, Paul.